Good afternoon, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Lots of stuff we're going to get into today. Obviously, a happy Mother's Day to everybody. Hope everybody enjoyed their holiday, took care of their moms and their important females in their life. A lot of stuff we're going to get into today. We're going to talk a little bit about betting. I do want to bring up a couple different things, including talking about Shohei Ohtani. And I did a little research, found out the very few times in baseball history that a player, and most likely a pitcher, won 9 games in a season and hit 7 home runs. It hasn't happened very often, and Ohtani, of course, the talent that he's got, has the chance to do it over a series of years. Feel free to comment on the Periscope or Facebook Live feed. We're going to talk a little basketball in a little bit. We're going to start the show by, talking about something that's not sports, and I do make a promise. The little PSAs I make or the little things that, grind my gears per se, I'm going to try to keep them brief. This one has to do with Mother's Day. First of all, I hope everybody enjoyed the Mother's Day with, the mothers in their lives, their wives, all the women that are very important to you. Mother's Day is a day where you have the opportunity to celebrate, the important women in your lives. And the one thing that everybody has in common is everybody came from a mother. A mother gave birth to every single person that exists in this world. And you might ask me, John, why are you starting out by talking about something silly like that? Well, you can make the statement, Happy Mother's Day. And, it may apply. You may say, hey, Happy Mother's Day. A woman that you say it to may say, hey, I'm not a mother. And my answer to that is, well, Happy Mother's Day to your mother. And in many cases, there's people that obviously a lot of people don't have their mothers with them. So it's a time where, you get to remember your mother and your mother's impact on you. And obviously, like many other people in this world, I've been blessed with a great mother. My mother, Nancy, I love her to death. She's my biggest fan. And, as we go forward, during a day like Mother's Day, it is a day not just to celebrate your mother, or to say to a mother that happens to have children. It's to mothers that don't have children. It's to fathers. It's to men. Because you know what? Everybody, whether you're a male or female, has the opportunity to, embrace and appreciate their mothers. Because that's the one thing we have in common. But that's all. I got that off my chest. That's it. You hear the Supreme Court making a big decision today in regards to sports betting. It's going to impact New Jersey. And you actually could see this happening within the next couple weeks to a month. As Memorial Day weekend's coming up, you may have the opportunity to wager on just about any sporting event, going there just like you're going to bet on horse racing, just like you're going down to a casino to place a couple bucks on a roulette table. You'll have the opportunity to, on a local front, and a chance of many other states getting involved in this is, looks like we're getting to a point where we're going to see sports betting legal just about anywhere. And I think it's outstanding. I think there's some very positive things to do with it. Maybe that person that isn't that diehard casino fan could put a couple bucks on some of the games that they end up, watching, or teams that they root for, teams that they don't root for. I've been, doing a little work on the side with a bookie. I put, wagers on certain things that, I call out on this show. And I make sure that I put my money where my mouth is. And a lot of people can say, hey, I could do picks every week. But, what enhances the value of the picks that you're making? Whether it's a typical Sunday in the National Football League, whether it's the NBA playoffs, whether it's March Madness, whether it's the NHL playoffs, what adds more to it? The fact that you actually have money on it. And I always said somebody, when you hear like the final score of a basketball game and somebody is, irate, going crazy, flipping out over the final score of the game, they had some money on it. And this is something you're going to see a lot more prevalent. Obviously, if New Jersey ends up, becoming a state that ends up legalizing sports betting, you see what's going on at Monmouth Park. You see the fact that they actually have a sports betting facility already in place, ready to go, just waiting for the okay, from whether it's, the federal government or the state or the Supreme Court or whatever. They've been waiting on this. So Monmouth Park is just about ready to go into business. And the one thing I do have a little bit of a concern about is, people obviously have addictions. And we've seen addictions as they apply to drugs and they apply to alcohol and, many other different addictions that exist. And obviously gambling is right up there in the top and is certainly an issue with a lot of people, hits home with a lot of Americans, a lot of people in this country. And, I have a fear, and I think a lot of other people have a fear, that if you start to wager, whether it's a little bit, and you have an addictive type of personality, you could end up wagering more money than you really have. And I think when you get to a place where you got the sports books, you got the state, you got whoever else is going to be profiting over your bets, whether they're good or bad, the money that you're wagering is going right to somebody, right? So, to get to a point where you're trying to make up money that perhaps you've lost. And this is something that, happens in terms with dealing with bookies. Anybody that deals with a bookie understands that, if you have a good relationship with them, as long as you're paying your bets, as long as you're not stiffing the bookie, he's going to be able to work with you a little bit. Let's say you're down, $1,000 on a couple bets you make. Well, you could do a double or nothing bet in some cases as long as you've developed a pretty good relationship with them. Well, when you're, sports betting, on the table now with a guy, with some dude that you don't know, some dude that you don't have any sort of relationship with it, it's going to be hard to go, double or nothing. You put the money down, that's your money that you've distributed from your own pocket, and you're not getting that back. If you throw $1,000 on something and you end up losing, you lose that $1,000. If you're dealing with a book, you say, hey, I'm going to put, $100 on, this or $100 on that. It doesn't come up. Let's say you don't have that $100. You could say, all right, double or nothing. And then it's just up between you and the bookie to handle it out. If you keep losing, at some point that bookie's going to come after you. But when you're going to a regular casino or you're going to a racetrack, and you're putting money down that you have, and I think to a certain point it's good. But now there's gonna be, and this is something that's inevitable. You see it happening in small claims per se. You could place a bet on a certain credit card. I think you could go up to like $500. But now you have a chance that if you have a really bad addiction problem, if you can't quite kick gambling, and you're table betting that you're putting on sports events every single night, you're parlaying this, you're going, you're changing bets as the action's going on, which I think is another fascinating feature that's going to exist in the world of sports betting. You're gonna get yourself into a huge amount of debt very quick. And credit card companies, we understand this. Anybody that's had any issues with credit cards know that the credit card companies could care less about you. They actually are betting on you spending. They want you to max out their credit cards, believe it or not. They're giving you free money, but they're giving you free money with the thought that they could potentially own you, not only to get that money, but to get the interest back and to be able to come at you from a large legal entity. So credit cards companies are betting on you spending their money. And this is the fear that I have, and this is kind of putting all this together. The thought about credit card companies with the potential to profit over somebody who is an addict. It's like a drug dealer, setting yourself up with, a lifetime supply of drugs, but knowing that they could come at you and take every single thing from you. We know in the world of drug dealing, in drugs as they exist, it's a type of market where, you're not buying, malicious drugs over the counter. You're dealing with somebody that you're paying and is providing you with the drugs. So, a drug dealer is never going to say, hey, you can put that on your credit card. So that's how I'm making a connection here. We're talking about, sports betting. It's all fine and good as long as people are dealing with their own bank accounts, their own cash. their own assets, things that they belong to them, that they're putting up as potential collateral to make these bets. Obviously, you make a bet with the hope that you can win some money, but you may not. You may lose. But if it's your cash, if it's your bank account, that's money that you put down and you take as a loss. Now, we enter the credit cards, and there you're gambling with money that is not yours. So if it's money that's not yours, you should provide some sort of proof that you'll be able to pay that money back if you end up losing. And think about it. There's nobody that's out there that does any sort of betting, whether it's simple, football pools where you got, the 16 games happening in the National Football League and everybody does their pick'ems in the office. Or, something down at the casino where you're putting a couple coins in a slot machine. There's an understanding that money that gets put out may not necessarily come back. But the thought is when you do it, hey, you got to be in it to win it. So, sports betting has a chance to probably grow throughout the country, not just in New Jersey. And, it's interesting to see how it could turn out. But I think if we're thinking about credit lines and credit cards as they, as they could be involved in it, it's something that I'd be against. And I don't know from a legal standpoint if there's any way to keep, that from happening. But obviously the banks that own, the credit card companies, there's only 4 really major banks that, have almost a monopoly on all the credit cards that are out there. They may, find it advantageous or interesting enough for them to issue credit cards to people. And especially gamblers that have a problem, people that have an addiction issue, that can't stop betting and get themselves, way, way over their head and continue to put money out there that they don't have, continuing to make bets with essentially the credit card company's money. But the credit card company, obviously, if they're going to issue a credit card that has anything to do with gambling, I'm sure they're going to, up the standards in regards to what they're going to ask, back. They might make you put a down payment on a credit card. They may ask you, to prove that you have enough money that the card is maxed out to in your account before they issue it to you, because they could probably set different rules. If there's credit cards that are specifically set up for gamblers, I think they could play with the rules a little bit. It's interesting to see how it turns out. Like I said, I'm not in favor of people being able to bet with their credit cards when it comes to sports betting. But obviously you see it in some cases in the casinos. You see it in very small cases in some racetracks. But as sports betting is going to, end up coming across this entire country, it's going to be interesting to see how many, how the credit card companies look to benefit from this. Not just the states, not just Uncle Sam, not just everybody else that's looking to profit over your stupidity, but how are the credit card companies going to get involved? I think they're coming in. Once again, John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Happy to be with you on the 14th day of May 2018. I did want to talk a little bit about the Boston Celtics and the Cleveland Cavaliers this past weekend, because that, all you had to do is just listen to the heads as they're all preaching what they thought was going to happen in the series, thinking that the Celtics, hey, no Kyrie Irving, it's a big difference, not him not being in the lineup. Gordon Hayward's been out for the entire season, but I tell you, not a lot of people have bet on the Boston Celtics. And my question is, all right, is this a preview, the Eastern Conference Finals with the Cavs and the Celtics? Is this just the beginning stage of whoever's going to get swept or demolished by the Golden State Warriors in the NBA Finals? And you might be right if you feel that way. And think about the Cavs, 2 of the last 3 years, they did win an NBA championship in between beating the Celtics a couple years ago. Beating the Warriors in the Finals a couple years ago. And, is it maybe one of those things where you say, hey, we've seen the Cavs last year. Cavs didn't look like they were on they could compete at the same level with the Warriors in the Finals last year, losing in 5 games. So from a fan's perspective, would you like to see what the Celtics can do? I didn't really hear too much of that. Because a lot of it's centered on what was the best player on the court, and that, of course, is and will be LeBron James. And LeBron James is in a good spot for him because he knows regardless of how this season ends up, he could opt out of his deal. He could decide to go someplace else other than Cleveland after this year. But he also has a ridiculous streak going of 8 consecutive seasons being in the NBA Finals. He was in the NBA Finals his last year in Cleveland. The 4 years he was in Miami. The last 3 years he's been back in Cleveland. So he's pretty close. If he could help his team or guide his team or lead his team past the Boston Celtics, he could get to the NBA Finals for the 9th year in a row. And I know a lot of LeBron haters will say, well, over those course of the last 9 NBA Finals that you've been to, how many has LeBron James' team won? I don't think it's necessarily fair. I thought the time in Miami, he should be held absolutely accountable for. He made the decision. He decided to team up with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh with a good Miami Heat team and found a way in 2 of those 4 seasons, particularly the first year when the Heat lost to the Dallas Mavericks, to lose series that perhaps you could look back and say that LeBron and his team should have won. Now, the Golden State Warriors, the way they've constructed themselves, obviously they've built the team with, Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, and of course Draymond Green, adding Kevin Durant, making themselves only even better. It's a little bit of a tough spot because I don't think any of the teams that LeBron has been part of with the Cleveland Cavaliers have been anywhere near the level of these Golden State Warrior teams. So if you're going to knock LeBron a little bit for losing, 2 of those 4 NBA Finals with the Miami Heat, I don't mind. I don't mind knocking him for that because he was part of the team that he assembled, and those teams were very good teams. And if you could compare them to the talent on the other side, particularly the Dallas Mavericks that first year, they should have won that series. But I'm not going to knock him if he gets the Cavs, the way they're constructed right now, to the NBA Finals, and they lose to the Golden State Warriors. I will say this, though. The Cavaliers are best positioned to win this series against the Boston Celtics. And I understand they lost by almost 30 points yesterday, and it was a game that really wasn't close throughout the majority of the game. And it ended with LeBron James sitting on the bench for the majority of the fourth quarter, which I agree was a good move. LeBron was not, taking them back. They were not winning that game. He was not changing, a 20-plus point deficit in the fourth quarter. So it probably was best for Tyronn Lue and the Cleveland Cavaliers to let him sit. And he did that. But, I look at them and I look at the Cavs, the way they match up against the Boston Celtics, and I'm not going to change my opinion. And a lot of people agreed with me up to a certain point because they were making the same statements. They were saying, hey, the Cavs have the advantage because they have the best player on the court. And they do. And I think because of that, they should be expected to win. And certainly if you're the Cleveland Cavaliers, a fan of the Cavaliers, or a fan of another team in the Eastern Conference, you want to think that this is the prime time, the prime chance, the prime opportunity for the Cavaliers to win right now, to beat the Boston Celtics in this series in the Eastern Conference Finals right now, because probably next year, with a healthy Irving, with a healthy Gordon Hayward, and probably with, some added players to help them get to the next level, the Boston Celtics are going to be leaps and bounds better than every other team in that Eastern Conference, and maybe right on the level of that of the Golden State Warriors. So if I'm the Cavaliers, not only if I'm LeBron James, but if I'm anybody else that's on that roster, if I'm J.R. Smith, if I'm Kevin Love, I'm thinking about the sense of urgency that has to exist right now for them to win this series and take one more shot at the NBA Finals and the Golden State Warriors. I still don't think they have much of a chance. I think the Warriors are that much better. In fact, a couple of years ago, you would think that LeBron's best possible wingman would be Kyrie Irving. And I still remember Kyrie Irving hitting that shot, that three-pointer, at the end of Game 7, leading the Cavs to what was at the time certainly considered an improbable victory in Game 7 of the Finals. Now, I look at the thought of the Boston Celtics maybe getting past and winning this series, setting themselves up against the Golden State Warriors, I don't think they're going to have much of a chance. I think the Warriors would have the same advantage over Boston than they would if they were just straight up playing the Cavaliers again. Now remember, the Cavs and the Warriors have seen each other quite a bit. It's nothing new. You're looking at it, these two teams aren't going to be that surprised of anything that they're going to offer each other, especially with Durant around last year. So I think, it could be a good matchup up to a point, but pretty similar to LeBron being the best player on the court when they're playing the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think you look at it and you're like, man, it's like LeBron against four. LeBron James isn't going up against one player. He's going up against Durant and Curry and Draymond Green and Thompson and just about anybody else that they have on that deep Golden State Warriors team. So it's hard to expect. It's hard to believe enough in the Cavaliers that they could win. But a lot of people, let's be honest, a lot of people have already dismissed the Boston Celtics. Do you still dismiss them after they beat Cleveland by 30 in Game 1? Because so far they've held their home court. Now Game 2 becomes pretty interesting because if the Cavs fall down 0-2, I think a lot of people will still give them a chance, having a chance to play the next two games in Cleveland. If they win those games, they even it back up. They maintain their home court. It's not like the Cavaliers had the top seed or was in a better position. They don't have the home court advantage. The Cavaliers losing 2 games in Cleveland would certainly be a big deal and certainly could still happen. But I look at the Celtics and listen, I think they have some very good young talent. I tell you, you look at Brown and you look at the young talent that they've developed there. And I tell you, it just makes you just wonder, like, man, how good would this team be with Kyrie Irving there? How good would this team be with Gordon Hayward? Obviously, Tatum and Brown look like they're going to be two of the better, bright young stars in the NBA over the next series of years. And if you're a Celtics fan, you say, everything that's going on right now is just gravy. It is. You certainly can't look at this and say that there's anything that you're seeing right now that you can't say is just a little bit of a bonus, just a little bit of extra. I mean, the Boston Celtics, did they somehow manage to win an NBA championship here? And I don't think they will. I don't think they have a very good chance of winning, beating the Warriors, let alone the Cavaliers. So, the Boston Celtics are sitting here and saying, man, we're without 2 of our top players. And because of that, not a lot is going to be expected out of us. Not a lot of people are going to be pissed off in Boston. Sure, they will be. The diehard Boston Celtics fans are going to be pissed off if their team loses at any point. Anything short of an NBA title on any given season, regardless of the way your roster is constructed, regardless of what kind of injuries the team's dealing with, obviously there's going to be a short-term disappointment. But going up against no Irving, no Hayward, you want to max out what you possibly can here, sure. But if the Boston Celtics lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers, I don't think anybody's going to be that pissed off. If they somehow made it to the NBA Finals and got swept by the Golden State Warriors, as we hit the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show. Once again, John Pielli with you. Please feel free to comment on Facebook Live or Periscope, anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. Talking a little NBA here, and certainly not a big deal if the Boston Celtics don't win this series. But, how much is that going to tick off that Cleveland Cavalier fan or that diehard LeBron James fan that's going to follow him wherever he goes? If the Cavaliers, the way they're constructed, the way LeBron James has essentially put together this roster. Remember, he had an off season where he essentially was the GM. He brought in Dwayne Wade. He brought in Derrick Rose. He created by himself LeBron James, the general manager, the worst team money can buy. He created the 1992 New York Mets. And he had a chance mid-season with help from his general manager to move all the players that weren't helping, to bring in George Hill, to bring in Rodney Hood, to bring in Larry Nance Jr. and Clarkson, and give a little bit of a look to this team. Maybe players that individually could play a little bit better defense at certain times, that could maybe hit a shot in a big spot. And he's rode with them, with some ups and downs. But certainly in the playoffs, they've been very good. They had to fight tooth and nail to get themselves past the Indiana Pacers in the first round. They benefited from a completely star-struck team in Toronto. A team that decided to fire their coach, which I'm telling you, they made a mistake. The Toronto Raptors, by firing Dwayne Casey, they're not going to be able to find a better coach that's out there. Because why would that coach not have a job? Casey has proven that he can take this team through the regular season and has a good rapport with those players. And you can talk about, DeRozan and him having to sit him. At some point, management from a team's front office and ownership has to stand by their coach and has to let a coach coach. You look at what happened with the Memphis Grizzlies and David Fizdale. Gasol got upset, Marc Gasol, and they end up firing the coach. LeBron James having a little, hissy fit over David Blatt, he gets fired. Stan Van Gundy's been through it a couple times already. How about a time that we see in the NBA, an organization get behind their coach? And a coach that's trying to get the most out of his players because, number one, he wants to win. And number two, he wants to get the best out of all his players. But you got to let the coach have the final say. That's a problem with the NBA. It's becoming a players' league. The stars are being able to pick and choose who they have coaching. And it's essentially like the stars should be held responsible for the action that's on the court. Now, in the court of public opinion, you may be right. But when it comes down to it, the Cleveland Cavaliers don't win the NBA championship this year. It's going to be, hey, Tyronn Lue should have done a better job. It's a blame on the general manager, blame to the owner. It's not on LeBron James. In a court of public opinion, it may be. But everybody's able to pass the buck and say, all right, well, what does LeBron James need to surround himself with to win? Is that on the general manager? Is the coach getting the most out of LeBron James? It's time for NBA organizations and teams to stand behind their choices for general managers and coaches. And you put a guy into place, if he has ruffles the feathers of the big star, you know what? It should be respected. Because the stars are controlling the NBA. Once again, John Pielli, Passball Show. Happy to be with you. One of the things I wanted to talk about, we'll talk a little baseball. Now, I wanted to get into a little bit of Shohei Ohtani. And if you look at his numbers, he had a chance to win the game that he pitched the other day. And I think it's pretty cool to see, a guy that obviously has come over from Japan and has had success both as a hitter and as a pitcher. Because as we got into the season, we thought it was something that just wasn't going to be possible. He's going to have to pick one. If he throws 100 miles an hour, odds are he's going to have to be a pitcher. Because the way pitchers take care of themselves, the way pitchers prepare for the next start, it wasn't in the team's best interest for Shohei Ohtani to be, playing 3 games in between his starts. And obviously the Angels have catered to him. The Angels have done a pretty good job. They've allowed for him to, be the designated hitter in 3 games. They've pushed their rotation to 6 starters just to have that extra game that he could get in the field and swing the bat. And this guy's proven he can swing the bat. He really does remind me, and obviously nobody could remember this because I think there's very few people that were alive that saw Babe Ruth play. And honestly, anybody that was certainly didn't see him in the days when he pitched in the 19 teens. But it is like a Babe Ruth situation. And I was putting together some numbers the other day because I was interested to see, if Ohtani got his 4th win and had his 5th home run. Where does that put him in regards to baseball history? Like, how many pitchers have won 5 games or won 6 games or won 7 games and hit 10 home runs or 12 home runs or 15 home runs. And I ended up doing a little bit of research, and I'm surprised it wasn't out there. I'm surprised it wasn't sitting out there for everybody to see. How many hitters have, also won games as a pitcher? How many hitters have hit 7 home runs in a season and won 1 game in a season? So I ended up finding my variable, and I found, the number 9 for wins, and I found the number 7 in regards to home runs hit in a season. And I started this with one of the guys that was easiest to find. You know that Babe Ruth had a couple seasons where he won 9 games and hit over 7 home runs in a season. So Babe Ruth in 1918 won 13 games and hit 11 home runs. In 1919, he won 9 games and hit 29 home runs. I then went to Wes Ferrell, who was probably the best hitting pitcher in all time in Major League Baseball history. He won 11 games in 1933 and hit 7 home runs. He won 25 games in 1935 and hit 7 home runs. So I compared it to a couple other players. If you're a Mets fan, you remember Mike Hampton leaving the Mets after the 2000 season to join the Colorado Rockies. Now, Hampton was a very good hitting pitcher, didn't hit any home runs in his year with the Mets in 2000, but you knew in Coors Field he was going to have the opportunity to take advantage of it. Obviously, the high altitudes. He won 14 games for the 2001 Rockies and hit 7 home runs. So you're seeing with pitchers, you're seeing very few people get past that 7 home run thing. Now, Wes Ferrell hit 9 home runs, which is the record for most home runs hit in a season by a pitcher. So Shohei Ohtani, if he pitches, he's going to make, let's say, 27, 29 starts, whatever it is. He's going to qualify as a pitcher. So he is in, at this very moment, Wes Ferrell territory. He's got 5 home runs right now. All he has to do is double it over the course of the rest of the season. We think, as long as he stays healthy and continues to play at the pace that he's playing at, he's going to be able to hit 10 home runs. So Shohei Ohtani should set the Major League record for most home runs hit in a season by a pitcher. Babe Ruth, perhaps in 1918, could be considered a pitcher. He won 13 games. He hit 11 home runs. So maybe Ohtani's got to get past 11. Maybe he's got to hit 12 this year. Earl Wilson in 1966 won 18 games and hit 7 home runs. He hit another 7 home runs in 1968, winning 13 games. Don Drysdale had 2 seasons like that as well. 12 wins in 1958, 7 home runs, 23 wins in 1965, and 7 home runs. So in the history of Major League Baseball, and we'll continue. We'll talk about Don Newcomb, who won 20 games and hit 7 home runs in 1955. Bob Lemon won 22 games and hit 7 home runs in 1949. Now there's a pitcher that pitched in the 1800s, in the 19th century. His name was Jack Stivetts. And he won 27 games and hit 7 home runs in 1890. He won 33 games and hit 7 home runs in 1891. And then he won 26 games and hit 8 home runs in 1894. Why am I bringing up Jack Stivetts? Well, if you think of Shohei Ohtani, and obviously the chance that he has to play in the major leagues for a long time, we expect him to be a major leaguer for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. Obviously, if he is an Ichiro-like talent, maybe he could pitch and play 15 to 20 years. Maybe he pitches 12 years and can hit another 8 years. We'll see how that works out. But Jack Stivetts is the only player in Major League Baseball history to win 9 or more games in a season and hit 7 or more home runs in the same season 3 times. Not even Babe Ruth did that. Babe Ruth only did it twice. Earl Wilson only did it twice. Don Drysdale only did it twice. If Shohei Ohtani wins 9 games and hits 7 or more home runs this year and next year, he'll be on the same level as Ruth, as Wilson, and as Drysdale. The only players in Major League Baseball history to win 9 games in a season and hit 7 or more home runs in a season. If he does it a third time, you have to go back to the 19th century and acknowledge the only time it ever happened where Jack Stivetts won 26 or more games and hit 7 or more home runs in a season 3 times. I think it's pretty fascinating. And I think it's been proven pretty well that Ohtani's the real deal. And I'll tell you, from a fantasy baseball standpoint, I'm considering it. You know, the option to have whether you can either pitch him or hit him, I'm considering in a certain spot, maybe using his bat over the course of a week. Let's say he gets 4 starts or, 3 games to play as a designated hitter. I don't mind his numbers. I think that he could put up 20 points or 23 points. Maybe more than he could put up in 1 start. But I will tell you, if you look at the guys like, Hunter Green and, what's the guy's name? Tyler O'Neill or McNeil with the Rays. A couple guys that were drafted as potential two-way players. If there's going to be more of them in the game, if Ohtani's talent as it exists is going to entice more people to give it a shot, then I think you got to change the way fantasy baseball is set up. That you could use one player if you want, and use a very good hitting pitcher like a Madison Bumgarner, for instance. And I know he's on the disabled list. Hopefully the Giants will get him back soon, but we know he's a pretty good hitter. We know there's a couple other pretty good hitting pitchers, whether it's a Zach Greinke or a Noah Syndergaard. There's certainly guys that could swing a pretty good bat, but also pitch well. If you're a fantasy baseball owner, you should have the option, if you'd like, to take any one of your pitchers and use them a second time as a position player. And if you want to do that, you need to drop somebody. Let's say, you have a roster limit of 25 players and you want to use your pitcher also as a utility player or a designated hitter. You can do that, or you should be able to do that, as long as you drop a player. As long as your pitcher counts as 2 players on your team, and you use them as a pitcher and as a fielder, you should be able to do that. With obviously the rule of having to drop a player. Now Ohtani, you should be able to use him as a pitcher and as a hitter, but he counts as 2 roster spots. And you know what? Maybe somebody like that has a little more value. Think about it from a draft standpoint. You're getting 2 players for the price of 1. And if Madison Bumgarner, let's say, kicked up his game a little bit, or Noah Syndergaard, became a guy, let's say the next Wes Ferrell, that could go out there and hit 7 home runs over the course of the season and hit, let's say, 250 to 280, maybe you would want to consider using a player like that, a pitcher, as a utility player. So I'm waiting for CBS, I'm waiting for ESPN, I'm waiting for a fantasy baseball league to set itself up to where you could use a pitcher as a utility player. Be pretty cool if you could do that. And obviously those players would certainly have a lot more value. Shohei Ohtani, who may be, let's say, a 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick in most consensus fantasy baseball drafts, may become a 1st round draft pick if you look at his numbers. Let's say he goes out there and hits 16 home runs this year, wins 12 games. Let's say that all works out that way. You have the opportunity to get 2 players for the price of 1. And like I said, you could, move it up and talk about, some of the younger players that were drafted last year and have the ability to do 2 different things. A player like that, is going to have a little more value than that of a regular player that could only hit or only pitch. And what Ohtani is doing, he's provided strikeouts, he's providing innings up to a certain point, he's pitching into the 7th inning, a handful of times. So this is a guy that has a chance to do something pretty special. And not only that, it's going to open the door up to a lot of other different things that are going on. And I think it's interesting enough to see because if you have a player, let's say a good starting pitcher that's on a roll, we'll go back in years. We'll talk about Bob Gibson. Bob Gibson was an excellent hitting pitcher. He hit over 200 for his career. But think about it. Think about the value of batting average as it exists in Major League Baseball. We could talk about OPS and, weighted runs created and stuff like that. That all has value to it, but when it comes to batting average, we don't look at batting average the same way that we used to. So if you are a pitcher, if you are a legitimate good hitting pitcher, then you don't necessarily have to have a 300 batting average. If you look at, pitchers that hit around 200, hit about, 3-4 home runs, a little bit of power, can get on base. The fact that, a pitcher's hitting 190 is not that much of a big deal anymore. So if fantasy baseball leagues can open up the possibility of allowing for a pitcher to be used as a position player too, to let their hitting stats count, and that's up to the owner whether or not you think that player is good enough to solidify a U spot or a designated hitter spot on your fantasy baseball team. But if Madison Bumgarner's hitting 220 with 6 home runs and a handful of doubles, you can make a case that one start a week, he could potentially put up, 8 to 10 points. And that might be better than your average U player. Your Matt Olson that's striking out, 5 times a game. There's plenty of fantasy baseball teams that have people in their U or their designated hitter position that are doing nothing but strike out, that are putting up negative points every week. Why not use a Syndergaard in his one start and say, hey, on this particular start, maybe he goes out there and gets 2 hits and gets, 6 points or 7 points, which is better than a negative 5 that Matt Olson has given you. So it's just interesting to consider, but at least put that in. Put that up to the owner to make that decision. Obviously, Ohtani has an advantage over anybody that's pitching in Major League Baseball. He's a better hitter than any pitcher. He might be a better hitter than any pitcher that we've ever seen outside of Babe Ruth. So if you have Ohtani, if Ohtani is the 3rd overall pick in your draft because he has a chance to do both, so be it. But give the owner the option to use that pitcher as a utility player and as a pitcher at the same time. Because right now, you're only able to do both. So whatever league that exists out there, let me know what it is, because that's the league that I want to play. I want that league to be able to play Ohtani both as a pitcher and as a utility player at the same time. And I want the option to do that with Madison Bumgarner. And I want the option to do that with Noah Syndergaard. It's my choice. If that U spot ends up giving me absolutely nothing because I made the stupid decision to use a pitcher in that spot, at least that's my decision. Hopefully, fantasy baseball leagues start to wise up and allow for this to be possible. We're waiting a little bit right now, actually trying to check up on some of the things going on in the world of sports. You obviously got the hockey playoffs, Capitals are up. You got the NBA, a couple different possibilities. Budenholzer might end up getting the Bucks or Raptors job. Obviously, the big news today, the Supreme Court's decision in regards to sports betting. It's going to impact New Jersey. It's going to impact several other states. Each state is going to have the opportunity to chance, if they want, to make that decision, to decide that they want to have sports betting in their state. I don't think it's going to be a problem. The biggest issue I have is that, the credit card companies, I tell you, they are evil. They really are. And not just speaking from somebody that, can speak to credit card issues. Credit card companies are just out there to profit off of you. And I've said it before, they're betting on you maxing out their cards. So if it gets involved in gambling and you've got a compulsive gambler, somebody that has a legitimate problem when it comes to wagering on sports, and you give them a credit card, I don't care if it's a $200 limit. I don't care if it's a $500 limit, which I believe is what the law has set itself up to be. How are you going to give a compulsive gambler free money I mean, I think that's crazy. We opened up talking a little bit about Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day, everybody. That's, if your mother's around, you have a chance to think, obviously spend time with her. If your mother isn't, it's a day of remembrance. You remember the value that your mom had in your life. And you know what? If you're a guy, happy Mother's Day to you too. Happy Mother's Day to your mother. And I think we go out there and people say, oh, this John guy's just saying Happy Mother's Day to everybody. You should be able to. And I'm just going to leave it at that. You obviously got the Cavs and Celtics. 30-point win for the Celtics yesterday almost. LeBron James not playing in the fourth quarter. I still think the Cavs have the best player. And I think have enough momentum that if they can pull off a win here in Game 2, or maybe win Game 3 and 4 in Cleveland, I think they have the advantage. We'll see how it goes. I'm still hoping to see Caps Golden Knights in the NHL Stanley Cup Finals. Obviously, Winnipeg had a leg up. Washington won the first game. We'll see how that turns out tonight and in the future. And listen, we'll be back with you tomorrow. Anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America, this is the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.